Welcome aboard. You're tuned into a very special edition of the Open Journal here on KPFT, the Mighty 90, listener-sponsored, commercial-free, community-based public radio right here in the heart of Houston, Texas. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dwayne Bradley.
And I'm Stephanie Coleman. Tonight we present a special New Year's Eve conversation with U.S. Congressman Gene Green, who chose to retire after 13 terms as the 29th District Representative. As always, we welcome your opinions about tonight's show, past shows, or suggestions for upcoming shows and guests. Share your thoughts with us on Twitter with the hashtag KPFTOJ, or find us on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you at openjournal@kpft.org. Gene Green was the first congressman elected to represent the 29th District of Houston, which runs from the inner city neighborhoods of Houston's Denver Harbor and East End to the suburbs of the Aldine area. He was also the only person elected to represent the district until he decided to retire. We're very excited to have Representative Green with us this evening to look back at his career in politics. Good evening, Representative Green, and welcome to Open Journal.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Sir, you announced about a year ago that you'd be retiring from Congress at the end of this session. I guess that is the stroke of midnight. You turn into a pumpkin of sorts. What kind of worked into your decision-making process?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to have elected office for 46 years. Wow. 13 years as a state house member representing Northside Houston and Aldine, and in state Senate district, it went from Spring Branch to Baytown because our Senate districts are huge, and in the last 26 years in Congress since 1993. My wife and I decided that it was time that we spent more time with our family. Congress is a full-time job, even more than full-time. I come home every week. I do a lot of events in our district, but then you also need to be in Washington when it's time to vote, and your committee meetings, that's the job you're elected to do. So we both decided it'd be time to spend more time with our 4 grandchildren, and who are not in the Houston area, which is part of the problem. But you know, and we've been married 48 years. 46 of those years, I've been on the ballot every even-numbered year. So,
wow.
You know, and a mentor to me, former Senator Lloyd Benson. I was so upset at him in 93 or 92 when he decided to become Secretary of Treasury for Bill Clinton. And I had been with him. I'd done fundraisers with him over the years. And I called him and I said, Senator, I just got elected to Congress, and I'm losing the chair of the Finance Committee in the Senate. I have this whole list of things I wanted to get funded. And in his good South Texas, he said, Gene, you'll know when it's time to call it quits. But I'm looking forward to it. And it's not New Year's, but it's not the night that I turn into a pumpkin. I'm on the job until Sylvia Garcia is sworn in on January the 3rd.
Okay. So you've been the representative for us in the United States Congress, representing the 29th District from the Texas delegation. This is a district that was created by the Texas legislature in the early 90s, 91. The first time there was an election for a 29th district was 1992 when you chose to run, and it was designed by, I guess, the folks who were carving up the maps as a Hispanic majority district. What made you think that this was something you ought to run for back then?
Well, I really didn't intend to run for Congress. I was a state senator practicing law, but during 1991 we did hearings. The Senate did, and the House redistricting hearings. And we were actually at Texas Southern University at one of the hearings. John Whitmire was the senator, and Chet Brooks was the senator at that time. And I grew up in Northside Houston. My high school was 65% Hispanic, Mexican American in the 60s. And my friends in the community showed us a map at the public hearing. And being sometimes speaking when I probably shouldn't, I looked at it and I said, gosh, that map looks so good, I think I ought to run. I grew up there. I represented the area both in the State House and Senate over the years. And after the hearing was over, I went back and talked with these folks who I'd known for years and years. And they said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Well, I think I need to call my wife first."
Man.
Because it was an open seat, it was a new seat. In 1991, we had Ann Richards as governor, Democratic Senate and Democratic House, and Texas grew 3 new seats. So they were going to be Democratic seats and minority seats. One in Dallas that now Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson has held since '92. One in San Antonio, south of the border, that another state senator won, Frank Tejeda, and who was a state rep and state senator with me. And then one in Houston had no one like that would run. And we talked about it, and I decided if you ever want to run for Congress, you need to do it when there's nobody as an incumbent. And I knew it'd be a battle. At that time, it was 62% Hispanic surname, and we had 5 people in the race. Councilmember Ben Reyes, former state representative Al Luna, senator now, but Sylvia Garcia, who was a municipal judge, city of Houston, and an African American minister. And the 5 of us got involved in the primary, and I got into the runoff with Councilmember Reyes. And some people may remember the history of it. I won the primary, the runoff. I won the runoff, but somehow 435 or so of our constituents who voted in the Republican primary in March, they were allowed to vote in the Democratic runoff in April. And so we had a court battle of taking votes away from me. And then when Councilman Reyes rested, we started calling witnesses and taking votes away from him. It was a long trial, and by a visiting judge from Bryan. And at the end of it, after calling witnesses from both sides, I was ahead by 50, 75, whatever it was. And the judge, previously I was told that whoever was the last person standing in these court battles, if you had, you would win. That was judge-made law, not legislative law. So it wasn't firm. So the judge said, "I'm going to call a new election because you should have called all 435 of the people." And being a lawyer, I had 2 really good lawyers, former Senator Gene Jones and Senator Jack Ogg, who was representing me, and Buck Wood, an election expert lawyer. And they said that's just not the case. So we appealed it to the Court of Appeals. And it took another month. And so really nicely in late July of 1992, we had a new election, a new runoff election. And it was interesting because we had more people vote in that runoff election than we did in the regular Democratic runoff that had constables and state reps and everything else on it, because we were the only game in town. And who wants to knock doors in July in Houston, Texas? But we did, and we won that race. And so we had and I had a Republican opponent, but the district was at that time probably 65% Democrat, and we won the general election that year with about 65%. Although my Republican, who had a primary, but with all those elections and court battles, I owed everybody in the county, it seemed like. And I went into the general election. I looked at his campaign finance. He had $1 million in his campaign fund. And I said, thank goodness it's a good district. Although we knocked doors and did everything we did, and was elected in 1992.
It's one thing to be elected the first time, but you were reelected 12 times, never facing substantive electoral opposition. And you ran unopposed in 1998, 2002, and 2004. How did you solidify that type of support in the district?
Well, I went my first 6 years. I had primary opponents. In fact, they were city council members. Councilmember Reyes ran again in 1994, and then Councilmember Felix Fraga ran in 1996. And back then, I told the mayor of Houston, I said, "Mayor, is my farm team city council members? Because that's all I get for opponents in the Democratic primary." But I went 20 years without a Democratic primary. This district was Democrat. The Hispanic majority expanded to today it's about 78%. And it was a district, like I said, I grew up in. I went to what's now called Northside High School, but back then it was Jeff Davis, and it was a majority Mexican American high school. I grew up there, and a lot of my friends who I'm still friends to this day, and so I don't think if I had not gone to that high school I would have been accepted, but that helped. But also I realized our district is not a philosophical district. You know, Republican districts may be, you know, very conservative or moderate conservative, whatever. In our district, it's more service oriented. It's not a wealthy area, so I wanted to see if we could bring up our district to what other districts were. We found out in the 90s that the Head Start program was really terribly funded. And since my first committee in Congress was on the Education and Labor Committee, I talked to the Health and Human Services and said, why aren't you giving us a bit more slots for early childhood in our area? And they said the program's bad. In fact, at that time, Lubbock, Texas got more children in Head Start than Harris County. And that should have been a criminal offense because it was so bad. So I worked with them. They did an evaluation of the grantee at that time, and then they divided it in Harris County. So we started getting a lot more money for early childhood, which is really important in our district. And so I was doing stuff in the district. Our immunization rates were low, zip codes. And back then it was the Harris County Health Department and City of Houston Health who did the immunizations. And I looked at the zip codes, not just in our area compared to Woodlands or somewhere else were low, but San Antonio and El Paso. And they said, your district, it's Hispanic. I said, do we have more Hispanics in San Antonio or El Paso? And they're doing pretty good on immunizing children. And so we started doing our own immunization days in August, free, partnering with Texas Children's Hospital, with Harris Health Systems now, school districts, Galena Park, Aldine now, actually bring their school nurses in. And we got our immunization from the CDC, which is a federal agency who wants people to be immunized. And we started doing that over the years, and we've raised that percentage, and again, with local partners. Couldn't have done it with that. When I was growing up in Northside Houston, we had blended families, as it's called now. Some of the children are U.S. citizens, some were not. And one of the things I started with Congressman Luis Gutierrez from Chicago. Luis and I were elected in '92, and he's Puerto Rican. He came to me early in our career and said, Gene, I have the same problem you have. I said, what do you mean, Luis? He said, well, I'm a Puerto Rican in a majority Mexican-American district in Chicago, and I don't understand this citizenship problem. And I said, well, y'all been citizens since 1917. And he said, do you want to try and do citizenship days and put it together to help legal residents fill out their paperwork? Because on any given day, a lawyer would charge you $750, $1,000 to fill out your paperwork. And so we started that in 1994, and we've done it every year to around Flag Day in June. And we reached out to the community to help them for free get their family to be U.S. citizens. The fee is now, I think, $725 or something. And so we partnered with immigration lawyers. The Immigration Service for the first 2 years didn't want to work with us, but after that, and up until this last June, we had agents or staff there to help us to make sure those applications were correct. And because if you send it into the federal government and it's wrong, you lose your money. And that's probably a week's pay for some of our constituents. So we wanted to make sure they were correct. So over the years, it's both been personally rewarding because some of the stories are just amazing of people who have been legal residents for many years. And you know, they're already paying taxes. Why wouldn't they want to also decide who's going to spend your money when you're so they could vote, register to vote? So we did that since 1994, and everywhere I go, it's really gratifying when somebody comes up and says, "By the way, I got my citizenship through your workshops," and And back in '05, when we were heavy in the middle of Iraq, there was a gentleman who was in line, and I have great staff over the years who's helped and done most of the work. I just stand around and try and help and move. And he said, "I appreciate what you're doing." I said, "Oh, we do this every year." He said, "No, you nominated my son for West Point 2 years ago."
Oh, wow.
And I thought it was time I became a citizen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if that doesn't give you goosebumps, it's, and just this last month ago, I was in East End at a health facility at community-based health center, and a lady who got some training on being able to work at the community health centers, FQHCs, federally qualified health centers. After she got her award, she came down and she said, "By the way, I got my citizenship through your,"
wow.
and Luis Gutierrez, we both did it. In the late '90s, it was pretty popular. A few members around Texas, Democrats would do it, but then they didn't stick with it. But and we've, it's a service you can do.
Mm-hmm.
I do town hall meetings over the years. Lots of different. We do job fairs. We partner with San Jacinto College on the east side of our district to do a job fair in the spring. And then we have one in the north part of our district, a job fair in the fall, partnering with the Aldine High School and Lone Star College. And by the way, our Citizenship Day was at Houston Community College Northline. And so we partnered with our local communities colleges to provide these services directly to our constituents.
You're tuned into a very special edition of the Open Journal here on KPFT, Pacifica Radio, 90.1 FM. We are visiting with U.S. Congressman representing the 29th District of Texas, Mr. Gene Green, who is going to be passing that 29th District torch here in just a matter of a few days. So we're looking back at his career in politics and in service to the community. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for supporting this independent beacon on your radio dial. I'm Dwayne Bradley.
And I'm Stephanie Coleman. In a often polarized political system, you seem to have maintained a very human and issue-driven approach to politics and addressing the issues and really serving your constituents and base. You were elected to the state legislature in 1973. What did your career in those years, what are those things that really impacted, you felt were the most impactful, and what is the difference between that and how did that shape your career as a congressman?
Well, in Texas, health care has not been a major state issue, and it's still not, which is regrettable. But education is. When I was elected in the 70s, the battles were always over funding public education. And at one time, state of Texas, education funding was 60% state and 10% federal, and then the rest was local tax dollars from your school district. And that was the same way in '73. We were under federal court orders to equalize our funding because wealthy districts and low property tax wealth districts. So I love help doing funding for education in public education. And when I went to Congress, it was different because Congress Elementary Secondary Education Act is the main one. We have bilingual education. And I had experience in the legislature with those. State of Texas' first bilingual education was in 1973 by former and late senator and state rep from Corpus Christi. And so that was the first time the state actually put money into bilingual education, which was important in my state rep district and obviously in our congressional district. So I was interested in education. So when I got to Washington, it wasn't a big issue on the federal level, but I was on the education committee and we were reauthorizing the federal funding for public schools. And I was proud to be on the committee, and as a new member of Congress, they actually let me on the conference committee. And I haven't been on one since. but a colleague of mine, Congressman Javier Becerra, who was also elected in '92 with me from California, served in the assembly there, and we sat next to each other on our committee. And if you know new members in Congress, we don't call them freshmen anymore, but back then they called us freshmen. Now they're called new members. That may sound better. But Javier and I were full of trying to change things. And we both got on the conference committee because we wanted to equalize the federal funding. Senator Ted Kennedy, who was the lion of the Senate, he did the best job for Massachusetts for getting funding to his children, much better than we did in Texas. And same thing in California. So Congressman Becerra and I took on that to say, if those children in Boston, Massachusetts gets this amount of money, we want it too for mine in East End and Northside Houston. And he did from L.A. In L.A. And it was interesting. We were new members on the committee and on the conference committee here. I was sitting with people I'd just heard about, Claiborne Pell. When you think about Pell Grants for students going to college, and we were all on the conference committee, and we did get equity to Massachusetts. I just wanted the same money the Senator Kennedy got.
Tip O'Neill got it.
Yeah, Tip O'Neill before that.
Yeah.
And that helped because our district, every school in our district is a Title I because we're not a high wealth district. We qualify for it. In fact, the first federal money came to Texas in 1965. I was a junior in high school at Northside now, Jeff Davis then, and I was in biology lab, and the coach, who was a biology teacher and coach, said, "We're going to have a film today. Go get the audio visual projector." And so I went down and I said, "Coach, this is a new one. I don't know how to use it." And he said, "Oh, that's that new federal money we got in 1965. Technology back then was a new audio visual projector, and now we're spending it for computers, the flexibility." One elementary school in our district actually used their federal money to provide summer school, because we know that children, when they leave at the end of May, they need to be challenged, and they come back in September with not having read, not having to do things. So the principal with flexibility actually brought those children, said, if you want to come to school during the summer, we'll pay for it. And I was out there with them, and it was really great because their numbers in September, they didn't have the drop-off of interest and things like that. So, but federal funding can be used for, like I said, lots of different things that help an area. And I'm really proud of that. And we still fight over in Congress. But in '97, I went to the Energy and Commerce Committee. I had to give up my other committee because I wanted to do health care. And it's not bad being on Energy and Commerce if you come from an area that has, at that time, had 5 refineries and more chemical plants than I can count. But my goal was, because our health care in our district, we needed more federally qualified health clinics. We needed some type of health care program. And one of the laws that I was proud to be part of drafting was the Affordable Care Act in '09. And the House bill was a very good bill. But because of the 60-vote rule in the Senate, Senator Kennedy had passed away, and the Democratic majority didn't have the 60 votes to bring up the House bill. So we had to take the Senate bill as they wrote it, and which had a lot of flaws in it. And the 2 Supreme Court cases was Senate language. It wasn't in our House bill. But we got the Affordable Care Act for all its problems. And in our district, and when it was first created, 44% of my constituents went to work every day, and they didn't get insurance through their employer. And if we're going to do an employer-based health plan, then we need to have some mandates for the employers. And so that's what we did. If you had 50 or more employees, you had to cover with a quality insurance plan, not a fake one. And we had an individual mandate. I was fortunate enough because I worked my way through college as a union printer, and I always had health care. But my college job lasted 21 years because I helped manage the business, and then I decided it was time for me to go practice law instead of run a business too. But that was, and we'd had success early on. Of course, it was a big campaign issue in 2010. When President Trump was elected, they all thought they'd get rid of it, but it's not easy to get rid of it. They've done damage to it, but I hope that with the Democratic House, we will be able to expand because, in our district, if somebody gets a job, first they want to see how much they're making.
Mm-hmm.
The next question they'll ask, do I get insurance through my family?
Mm-hmm.
And so in our country, we've used employment-based insurance, and we were just trying to expand it to where it would work. And then we plussed up, Medicaid that the state of Texas did not accept. In our district, if the state would have taken billions of dollars of federal money, I would have like 46,000 of those folks in our district would have Medicaid. And so I battled on health care, fought with my Republican colleagues. There were things we found out that we could work together, though, on. Mm-hmm. And I'm, it doesn't do me any good if I don't try and help folks. Mm-hmm. And if I don't get this far, then if I can get halfway, I can get something. Mm-hmm. And that's what you do when you have you're a Democrat and a majority Republican Congress, and now with a Republican president. You have to try and see how much you can get. And as a football player, let's move the ball down the field. I may not score a touchdown, but I will at least get better. And that's what I've tried to base it on.
It's interesting because you have outlasted and served with and under 4 presidents. As that evolution of politics and parties switch, how do you stay focused on the mission? What are some of the challenges of moving the ball upfield through the change in office?
Well, late George H.W. Bush, I only served 20 days with him, and because then President Clinton was inaugurated. But I served all 8 years with his son, and of course Bill Clinton and President Obama, and now for 2 years with President Trump. I've always been able to work with who is ever president. There are a lot of challenges now, and because I don't share the same value the president has. That's the nicest thing I can say.
Yeah, it's an honest, very honest.
Just to maybe go back to your roots and also into what's coming behind you in Congress with President Trump in office. You were talking about Congressman Becerra and yourself coming in '92, kind of full of, I don't know, we'd call it vinegar, and there's a whole crop of new representatives coming in. Representative Ocasio from New York. We've got a Muslim representative coming in from Michigan and
also
Minnesota as well. A lot of women, a lot of youth, a lot of energy, probably a lot of vinegar as well. How do you see that energy coming in the wake of what you've been working with over the years?
Well, every person who gets elected, I think to any office, but particularly for the U.S. Congress, wants to do something. They want to improve their districts, the country, and so you come in there, but then you realize you have 434 other members to be able to work with. And so we split up on our parties, and then even within your own party. Sometimes I argue with my Democrat colleagues as much as I argue with my Republicans. And so you try and work the system to get things to improve. Again, not getting the whole loaf of the bread, but you can get half a loaf. And that's what I think our forefathers did, who creating a Congress that not always had 435, but it does now, and to deal with it. And so you have to try and lower your expectations once you realize you don't have a majority of the House.
Mm-hmm. It's a machine you have to work with.
Yeah.
Work within.
We're visiting with Congressman Gene Green here, a retrospective on his career in politics and as representative for the 29th District in Congress from Texas, serving in Washington since 1992. You're tuned into Pacifica Radio 90.1 FM in Houston, the mighty 90 KPFT. This is the Open Journal program, and we thank you for joining us on this special edition, and we thank you for supporting this independent beacon on your radio dial. I'm Dwayne Bradley.
And I'm Stephanie Coleman. While in Congress, you are described as a workhorse, not a show horse. That's complicated. You have to also be reelected. How do you balance staying engaged, running for office again, and moving forward with what you need to do?
Well, when you have a 2-year term, once you're sworn in Texas, because we have the earliest primary, there's 10 months or 11 months, then you have to run for reelection.
Yeah.
And because our primary is in March, and I don't disagree with that. I like Texas being first. So you have to do both things in your district to show your constituents that you're doing something, but also in Washington. And it's interesting, I was in the Texas legislature, and in the legislature, House and senators make $600 a month, whether you earn it or not. And in Congress, though, we get a real decent wage. You don't not supposed to have outside income, and at least earn income. And but it's a job, and so you have jobs to do during the week in Washington, and then you come home to your district and do things here. And each district is different. Ours, like I said, is more service oriented. I love going out and doing things to help people, and whereas in a wealthier district, it's more philosophical. And even then, though, you have to have, if you're a Republican, you still have to show up in your home sometimes and do stuff. And but in ours, it was, like I said, more delivery of services. And I didn't ever. In fact, I'm in retirement. I'm not going to live in Washington. I'm going to live in Houston, but spend a lot of time with our 2 grandchildren, 2 in South Texas and 2 in Omaha, Nebraska, and serving in Congress, getting on the plane every week and going back and forth doesn't give me time to see my 4 grandchildren. Omaha's tough. I can drive 6 hours to South Texas very easily, but Omaha's a day and a half drive.
So what was your toughest election as you look back, and was there one that made you say, am I still up for this?
Oh, well, the toughest one is your first, always. And, of course, having a primary with 5 people, a runoff, and then a court case, and then another runoff, and then a general election where you had a Republican who had $1 million in the campaign account. We were selling our T-shirts. He was handing his out. But your first one's always the toughest one. And I explain to folks, your next toughest is your second one, because then you have to show what you've been doing. And I think that's pretty well bipartisan, and over the years, I was fortunate enough, like I said, 20 years without a primary opponent. Our district was a Democratic district in '92, overwhelmingly for President Clinton, President Obama. Hillary Clinton got 73% of our district in 2016. So a Republican was running, even if they had $1 million, they couldn't get there. And but over the years, doing things in the district and then working what I can in D.C. Our constituents also look at our voting record. Houston Chronicle puts a few of the votes in, but you need to be there. In the legislature, sometimes you can miss a day because you have to support your family. But in Congress, your income is that. And so I was always proud to have like a 97% attendance record in Congress and still show up at home. In fact, in the late 90s, I had people at Civic Clubs say, I see you more than I see my city council member. And because I would come home on Thursdays. Congress sessions typically Monday through Thursday, Tuesday through Friday. And you can plan events in your district that provide assistance. And that's what we tried to do.
That's wonderful.
So, Congressman Green, you talked about the quick recycle period between running in the primaries and then the election and then getting ready again. And knowing that there's a big financial interest in the promoting of campaigns and the necessity of fundraising in order to have that go forth, how do you feel about the influence of money in the political process and how that affects the ability of regular citizens to be more engaged with the process?
Well, It's terrible. In 1992 and 94, our races would cost $200,000, give or take, and now, gosh, they're $750,000, $1 million, and you have to do. Not only do you be a member of Congress working at home and in Washington, but you have to have a fundraising base. And our ethics rules have gotten stronger over the last few years, that how you can raise money and what you can spend it for. But typically in an urban area with media that you'd have to do. The last campaign I had was in the primary was in 2016, and the primary in a short election cost about $1.5 million. And when you're calling for money, you're not calling constituents typically, particularly in a district like I have. And it takes your time away from your job, but it's part of the system.
Yeah. That's the price of doing business, right? It's a necessary
Yeah, and it's
part.
a high price sometimes.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of people, when they say, I'm just tired of dialing for dollars, that's why I'm retiring. So, but I was fortunate. That's not why I'm retiring.
Yeah, you've done well.
Well, any thoughts on the possibility of publicly funded elections? Is that just a pipe dream, or are we too far down the road of money really influencing this process and kind of driving it?
Well, there needs to be reform in how we fund our campaigns. I've looked at public funding for it. We have some for president, but most of the time people say, "Well, we don't want to fund your campaigns with tax dollars." And somewhere along the way, there needs to be, and it'll typically be a terrible scandal. Watergate. We passed a lot of campaign finance reform in '93, my first term, that has fallen by the wayside over the last 20 years.
So you've mentioned that family is a sort of very important part of the balance, and you've done an amazing job of maintaining family as well as serving your constituents, which is not an easy sort of balance there. How do you think you were able to do that? What were the pros and cons of that sort of process?
Well, you have such a challenge, again, being in Washington to work during the 4 days or whatever, and then being at home doing things in your district. And my children grew up in politics. I was a state rep when our daughter was born in 1974, our son 76. I was a state rep and state senator and up until 92. And they've been involved in all our campaigns.
Yeah.
In fact, when I had a primary in 2016, I was proud that our daughter's in Omaha, a physician at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. Our son is in South Texas at the Port of Brownsville and has a company there. But they took time off to come up with, and like every campaign, we have our door-to-door campaign, and I love to do that because one thing, as a sitting member of Congress, people are surprised you're knocking on my door.
Yeah.
And so they came in as much as they could. In fact, on Election Day, my daughter spent the day with me, and our son spent the day with my wife, because that was part of their life. And they both have 2 children, so in their own jobs, but they understood, and I was proud to have my daughter with me. She is very health conscious, much more than I am, and when during the day in the Kansas on the election, she said, "I can't believe I'm choosing between cheese crackers and peanut butter crackers for lunch." On election day, you try to shake hands with people. You don't stop for lunch.
That's when she knew it was real.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, it's nice to see that they also have become involved and sort of understand the process and the commitment that it took from you to be such an asset to your constituents and the city and the state as a whole. So with that, with your time with your new grandchildren, do you have any special plans as you begin to retire?
Well, my wife has been asking me for the last 15 years to clean out the garage, and she still does. Although now, because we had to close our offices, I've moved a lot of stuff into the garage and even into the living room, the extra bedroom. So, and we're trying to get that because I have 2 district offices and, of course, our Washington office, and I have to bring them home. And I have a lot of plaques, and thank goodness for the honors, but we don't have enough walls. but so
hilarious.
we're going through that challenge now.
She didn't see that coming in the request to,
No.
to come back home. That's wonderful.
So, Congressman, we touched on the issue of campaign finance as kind of a hot button issue, something that's problematic and has been and will continue to be. Another one is the issue of gerrymandering. You have an interesting gerrymandering story. Didn't you have to move once because of your district getting shifted on you?
Well, in 1991, we had Democrats majority, a Democratic governor. The 3 new seats were going to be Democrat. But not just Democrat, they were going to be minority because Texas had not redistricted based on the population, whether it be Hispanic or African American. So the 3 districts were minority. Over the years, and the Voting Rights Act has been almost turned on its head. It was passed to make sure we had equality. And in 2003, when Republicans for the first time got control of both the state house and state senate and a governor, they decided to redistrict in the middle of a cycle that had never been done. And so they redistricted and gerrymandered. We lost actually 5 Democrats. One because he switched because his district became more Democrat, and the other ones were either defeated or didn't run. In our district, they couldn't. Our district is a minority district, Hispanic district. The worst they could do is take my house out of our district. And so that's what they did.
Wow.
I lived near the Intercontinental Airport, and the neighbor's not a big neighborhood. They came to the back of my property line, put my house in what's now Ted Poe's district, and my back neighbors was in Sheila Jackson Lee's district.
Wow.
And I wasn't going to run against either of them. But because Sheila was an incumbent, Nick Lamson was running against Ted Poe because that district went all the way to Beaumont. And so I told my wife, I said, when the Supreme Court validated that, I said, we need to find some place. She was still teaching then. She was 26-year algebra teacher at Aldine ISD. I said, you need to find some place that's close to the airport, that's in the district, and you feel comfortable with. And so we did that. We moved, and Tom DeLay and I were friends in the legislature, and he was the engineer of all this gerrymandering in 03. And I actually saw him about 2 months ago in the Capitol, and I said, Tom, I'm still thanking you for my new mortgage. Because I was in a majority Hispanic district, and as an elected official, I said, how long would they put up with me if I didn't even live in the district? So we temporarily moved into a garage apartment in Northside Houston, where I grew up, and a friend of mine and moved in on a very cold night that I forgot to turn on the gas, but I did have the electricity on. So we spent the night there and established our residency, and then in 05 we bought a new house in the district. And but anyway, I wasn't going to let them get me that way.
Yeah, that's great. That was a great battle. So as you have sort of outwiggled some of the politics of staying in office and it's other parts that we don't realize how complicated that might be. Are there some wins that you're really happy as you look back on your legacy that you say, I'm really glad I fought that fight?
Well, the Affordable Care Act was something that of our district was probably one of the worst in the country of people who worked who didn't have insurance through their employer. So that's why the employer mandate was so important. And I know the Trump administration is trying to take it away, but I don't think he can do that. That's in statutory law. executive orders don't let you change law. You can interpret law, but you can't change it. So they'll be in the courts, and hopefully Congress will work it out and expand health care. You know, Affordable Care Act's not magic. It's not perfect, but the goal is to get health care to people. And starting in the 90s, since LBJ, there was a federally qualified health clinics around the country. The Great Society created these clinics, and in the mid-90s, Harris County had, I think, 4 or 5, whereas Travis County had 20. And during the 90s, we started working with the county and the city of Houston to partner to expand these federally qualified health clinics. And that's one of I'm proud of over the last number of years. We've been able to open a number of clinics, not just in our district, but obviously I care about the ones in mine. We have one in Denver Harbor that's really great. In fact, they did a satellite clinic for pediatrics in Northside Houston, neighborhood centers, and we have about 12 or 13 clinics in our district now. They're not free clinics, but they get federal funding. Of course, they're a nonprofit, but we can have in the neighborhood people to manage their diabetes, to manage their hypertension, where children can go, so you don't have to go wait in an emergency room for 6 hours or something like that. And so I've been proud of that. I'd still like to get a couple more. And in the Galena Park area, there's a school-based clinic in Galena Park, and I'd like to expand that to include the adults, because to serve the whole family. And we've been working with the superintendent in Galena Park, Harris Health Systems, who have those school-based clinics. But I don't know if I'll get it done in the next few weeks.
You never know. You have some accomplishments. What are the things that you wish you did more, the things that are your disappointments or regrets?
Well, a number of years ago, in fact, when my successor was county commissioner, I have a very industrial area in East End. And one of our goals when Sylvia Garcia was county commissioner, was to buy open space property in East End and even North Side, to where we can have parks in a community that's an industrial area. And back in those days, we could do earmarks. So I would work with different committees, Republican, Democrat, for getting money to Harris County and the city of Houston to expand parks. And because there were some folks who took advantage of it and actually were prosecuted criminally for selling these earmarks, but none of ours was that. It was always going to a government agency or nonprofit. And we've not been able to do that because typically we could get 80% federal funding and local would come up with 20%. And when Sylvia Garcia was our county commissioner, she would come up with the 20%. And we expanded parks along Buffalo Bayou. Our mantra was that I want the east side of Buffalo Bayou look as nice as the west side. That's going to be impossible because it's industry. You're not going to take somebody's job away, but there are vacant spaces there that we could create local parks for the people who actually live in that neighborhood. And we had some success. It's called Navarro Park now on Wayside in Buffalo Bayou. But it was one time Buffalo Bend. It was federal money with Sylvia Garcia coming up with the match, and her successor, Commissioner Moorman, actually developed it. And so there's a bend in the river, in the Buffalo Bayou there, that's just, you wouldn't think you're in an industrial city because it's so pretty. And then we expanded Days of Olive Park to the Buffalo Bayou, and that's why we're working still on hike and bike trail from that park to the county park up on Wayside in Buffalo Bayou.
And I'm looking for good things on this new East River project in the old KBR Halliburton complex, just north of the bayou there, between I guess Waco, York Street, and Jensen.
Yeah, I had that area for a little, but one of our many redistrictings, I lost the area to the west of Milby Street here in East End, and it was But I've seen it happen in the old, the building that, and it's cleaned off now, and there's going to be redevelopment. Although we have some issues in our district with gentrification. At one time I had the Heights, and that was an issue with the Heights my first 4 years in Congress, but in East End. So I don't want to displace people who have literally for generations lived in the same neighborhood. And so I think the city's real sensitive to that, and hopefully they'll be able to do that.
Been watching the encroaching townhouses approach the Eastwood neighborhood, and that's that's kind of a daunting task, as much as finance in the election process is a daunting task as well. So, Congressman Gene Green, in our few moments we have remaining with you on this special edition, beyond being a more stay-at-home father and grandfather between the Valley and Nebraska and back here in Houston, I would imagine you're probably going to be available to give ample advice to freshmen or first-time U.S. Congressperson Sylvia Garcia, and what else are you looking forward to?
Well, I'm happy with Sylvia being my successor. We ran against each other, and you get to know people when you run against them. And then when she was county commissioner, we worked together, and she understands county government, state government, as a state senator. As best as you can get prepared for Congress, she's prepared for it. And I'm looking for her to be very successful, and I want to help her in any way I can. I also don't want to hang out in her office. So it's her job now, but and she knows I'll be glad to help. She knows how to get a hold of me. And but my wife, I turned 71 this last October, and I don't know if I've been offered some jobs, but I'm going to wait and see. But because my goal is to spend more time, my priority is with my family. Because for the last 46 years in elected office, but I want to be a grandfather. I don't mind taking them to school, picking them up.
Nice. Very nicely done.
All right. Well, I think that it's time that we have to wrap up the Open Journal. Any parting thoughts you'd like to share with your constituents and the greater Upper Texas Gulf region as we bid a fond farewell to your congressional career? Gene Green.
Well, this time in history is so much different than my experience. In 1992, it was called the Year for the Women. The Year for the Women is 2018. And the new ideas, now everybody will go to Washington and they're going to remake the world, but then they realize that you have to work with other people. And if you get frustrated with that, then you're not going to be a good elected official. But there's so much opportunity now with the new people coming into Congress. And in Texas, our first Hispanic females, Sylvia Garcia and former County Judge Escobar from El Paso. There's new enthusiasm. Some of us who said, we need that new enthusiasm in Congress to be able to say, well, we're going to change things. And in 93, we tried to do that. We had Democratic majority. Bill Clinton was president, and then in 94 we lost the majority, and so hopefully it will improve on progressiveness, because health care, getting people opportunity to earn a living for their family, that ought to be both Republican and Democrat issue, because if they're successful, our country will be successful.
That's wonderful. Well, as we begin to wrap up the Open Journal, we invite you to stop by kpft.org for more on this evening's program and to let us know how you feel about what you've heard.
I'm Dwayne Bradley. Thanks so much to our dedicated all-volunteer staff, including our engineer, special engineer tonight. That would be Tom Richards, along with Ramblin' Ranger Rick Campbell, Susan Phillips, our collaborators Sherry McGinty, Neil Culbreth, and Mike Badziak. Special thank you to our friends at Houston MediaSource for collaborating on this special edition of the Open Journal. Open Journal theme music provided by Kevin MacLeod. Join us on our first broadcast of 2019 next Monday, when our guests will be Jessica Wiggins of Bike Houston, and Letty Luna from the Children's Museum of Houston.
Thank you again, Congressman Gene Green, not only for your interview, but for your commitment to Houston and its residents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Green. And thank you, dear friends, for your support of the Open Journal and Pacifica Radio. We leave you, as always, with a thought to carry you through the weekend, in this case, into the new year. It comes to us from Albert Einstein, who said, "Nothing that I can do will change the structure of the universe, but maybe raising my voice, I can help the greatest of all causes, goodwill among men and peace on earth." Take care of each other.